The Never-Ending Tales, Chapter 2, The Soul Factory of Mr. Grey. The story of the multiverse is absurd as any story. From its very beginning, it never really made sense. The primary elements of void and silence were never meant to be broken, nothing was really meant to be, but nothing really lasts forever, even when time is not part of the equation. The void and silence ended up retreating and leaving the stage to more changeable elements, the light and the music of time. The empty chaotic states that used to be left place to a more dynamic order. However, even if this whole new place started to be and time started to run, the old elements never disappeared completely, they still had an impact on this new world that took their place. When the multiverse first appeared, the stars were said to be the first glimpses of light that broke the void. However, silence still resonated in many of its branches. Silence cracked, though, with the motion of the star's light, flickers and waves that first filled this new space with planets and rocks and dust. All those were first motionless, still trapped in the silence, but light kept on moving, shining through the multiverse, crafting the melody of the origins that pushed everything into motion. With motion, time started to run, and the light kept on shining even more, constantly building new layers of space for each new possibility. Those new universes branched off. Each time something could be, light made it be. Once things started to move and to be subject to the new phenomenon of time, they began to change and evolve, trying new combinations and new ways of being. The phenomenon ended up creating the most curious of all systems, life. Life was first a discontinuous phenomenon that was occurring and quickly disappearing. The first living things weren't really able to sustain themselves. They were weak and lacking any kind of understanding of the world that surrounded them. They weren't even aware that they existed to start with, acting more like irregular inanimate matter rather than living organisms. They lacked survival instincts. Generations perished and were recycled in the huge dumpster that the multiverse is. However, life was evolving faster than any other thing, and in some layers of the multiverse, it developed a peculiar defense mechanism, the soul. It is said that souls were generated through the last big remains of void by life itself. Souls were then a sort of technological addition to the vaster phenomenon of life. But things evolved even more, and souls became the very essence of life, making the other aspects of it only contributing elements to the eternal journey of any soul. With the soul, the race for surviving and reproducing started. Each new life wanted to stay around, instead of completely vanishing after death and switching to a state of non-being. Everything remained in the multiverse, but on a different form. Every time a soul reappeared, it started from scratch, but through natural evolution, multiplying and mingling with other organisms, each new vessel was way more developed and offered a better life for the soul. Souls evolved so much that some of its representatives developed a quite helpful ability, being aware of what was around them in a much more complex level. In other words, those souls developed consciousness. Human life is a mere example of this much larger phenomenon, and like all the other models of conscious life through the multiverse, it evolved in the same way. However, the way it appeared in some versions of the world is a quite different story. In some other worlds that are quite similar to ours, humans didn't evolve to become what they are. Their souls weren't really the product of generations and generations of selective amelioration, but rather the effect of the curiosity of other conscious souls who were testing with things that exceeded their understanding. In the angels' universe, many think that the first Adam was the first living organism in this region of the multiverse. This assertion is not completely true. Life existed before him, but in a way so simplistic that it's rarely recognized as being life. The first Adam, on the other hand, was the first and maybe best prototype of soul-equipped life. Its existence alone was tremendously important, as he was the source of the angel's soul and every other living organism that appeared in their world. The first Adam's soul was considered as an old god by the angels, the very embodiment of both light and void. In that world, the angels were the first living beings to build a civilization, the first race to transcend the basic states of existence as an incoherent process through the use of consciousness. But even then, they weren't as complex as their old god, the first Adam. Through their history, many angels wanted to reproduce the creation of life, to synthesize it, but eons passed before they got that knowledge. Knowing the true essence of life put them in a fear that paralyzed their attempts to reproduce the phenomenon. They got so scared that all what was exceeding their current lifestyle became taboo and their society became frozen in time. The taboo was also a justification to stop Lucifer from acting. He was considered for ages as the personification of evil for the mere reason that he pursued an even greater knowledge. When he lost the right to study the first Adam, he led a rebellion creating the opportunity for some angels to become something else, fallen ones commonly called demons. He was banished to the very word who led the angels to establish the taboo, the word that they created while trying to craft life itself, the human word. Lucifer's interest for the first Adam wasn't the only action to understand the process of life in that universe. While Lucifer was trying to convince the other archangels that the old god must be studied, someone else was interested in the knowledge of the void. During the golden age of the angels, when the archangels' council still had 7 members, another angel, a cherub of the steel angels, was also able to attain the state of archangel but never joined the council. His name was Michael Gray, and he attained the archangelhood by sacrificing himself for the sake of his quest for the lost knowledge. Instead of dying and joining the ocean of the collective consciousness, the fountain's light fell upon him, and he became a seeker archangel, an archangel that got his status by defending his own interest rather than by complete compassion for someone else. Mr. Gray, as everybody used to call him, acquired by that act the knowledge of the void and the essence of the absence of everything. He then moved from the central continent to the eastern one. He lived alone for years, dedicating his days to his quest, understanding bits by bits what made life what it was. He knew about the void and the light as all other angels did, but he went a step further and verified those beliefs. His experiments gave him the undeniable certitude that those were more than stories and myths, but elements that truly filled the world he lived in. At least, the light filled most of it, but he discovered that far away, void still existed, and to assert that statement, he needed to manipulate it. He tried to synthesize the void and failed again and again, but he never gave up his pursuit and ended up succeeding. After a few centuries of unfruitful trials, he did what nobody thought was possible up to then. He created void. His years of dedication produced a single drop of pure void, a very small amount that was powerful enough to create brand new souls. The Archangels' Council weren't really advanced in their knowledge of the void at that time, as they mostly focused on Lucifer and his intentions of studying the power of the first Adam. It all happened before the beginning of taboos, when the angels were still searching to know and understand the nature of the world that was around them. During those ages, Mr. Gray created humanoid specimens, beings extremely similar to angels, but without any particular basic elemental powers or wings. The continent Mr. Gray was living in, what later became the land of the demons, started to be populated with those new synthetic beings. They were the proof of the power of the void. The angels used to call those artificial creatures humans, and they used to call the continent the soul factory of Mr. Gray. The humans that Mr. Gray created lived for 2 centuries when a curious phenomenon started to happen. They developed a consciousness similar to the one of the angels and demanded to be treated equally. Mr. Gray, who first established himself as their god and creator, going so far as teaching them to call him the new god, saw rebellion rising against the power he used to have over them. Anger filled those synthetic souls and disagreement rose among them. Some still believed in Mr. Gray, acknowledging the godly status he went by, while others rebelled against him, saying that he was no god and that he was merely more spoiled by nature. How could he be the one who created them if he was so similar to them? They believed that a god couldn't be as puny and fragile as Mr. Gray seemed to be. They started a war among the artificial humans, and fearing for his life, Michael Gray left them resolve their own problems. When he finally came back, all the humans were dead. They ended up killing each other ruthlessly. The winning side was the one of the humans who thought they were the angels' equals, but when they realized they would never be treated equally, they let themselves die, ending the journey of a whole species that was never meant to be in the first place. Mr. Gray was destroyed by the failure of his experiments and was crushed by the weight of his terrible actions. He created an organization to seal the knowledge of the void and stop anybody from accessing it by establishing the taboos. His shadow organization disappeared among the angels' race and kept on existing, while everybody forgot about those events with time. He threw the drop of void into the fountain of light, which created a whole new layer of the multiverse and a gateway to it. That new layer slowly evolved and became the equivalent of the angels' universe, with a planet bearing conscious life, a new Earth populated with less radical humans. The truth about that Earth's origin disappeared with Mr. Grey shortly after those events. Thank you for staying until the end. If you enjoyed the chapter, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel to be informed about upcoming chapters. You can also purchase the Neverending Tales as either a paperback or a hardcover with the links in the description. See you next time on Inked Feather.